Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this little bit of Hebrew in the middle of the week as we continue in our study of the book of Jonah, chapter 1, and we're picking apart verse 5 and looking at this first part of the verse. And so this is very interesting. Yeah, of course, the Lord is hurling a storm, as we saw in verse 4. And it says in English here, as we're reading from the Jewish Publication Society, the mariners were afraid and cried every man unto his God, and they cast forth the wares that were in the ship into the sea to lighten it unto them. And so the Jewish commentators, as highlighted here in this lower footnote, said, every man unto his God. So they look at this that the crew was a mixture of different nationalities, different people, each with its own national deity. And so from that, sounds very interesting. So we're going to look over on the other side of the screen and we'll see the other commentary that we're looking at. And they uh, break this apart and feel that there is a identifier here of how do we view other religions. And so fascinating way to go. Before we get into that, though, we're going to take a look at Bible Hub. And there's a few words here in the Hebrew that I think are just very fascinating to look at. First one is for the word sailor. And when I looked at the word here, the Hebrew itself is Vayireu Hamalachim. And Hamalachim has a word uh, sounding, it sounds like other words that we use. There's the word Melech, which is for a king. There's a word Malach, which is where we get the word salt from. And so that's very interesting here because the has the hey in front, which is a definite article, and it's the hamalachim. So unpacking this word, we see that the root word is the mem lamed het, and it is translated as mariners by the King James Version, sailors by the NASB and the Jewish publication. And it comes from the root word of to salt, of malach. And a sailor, translated here, is someone who is following the salt, which is quite fascinating. You may be familiar with the terminology of someone being worth their salt. And we don't always know where these roots or etymologies come from. But here, for a sailor, is someone following the salt. Now, for us today, salt is such a common commodity that we don't even know where it comes from. We don't give it much thought. But back in olden times, salt was very sought after. It wasn't easily found. And so it had to be brought in because some places did not have salt naturally. And salt had many preserving qualities. It wasn't just used for making your food taste better, but it was used for preserving, was used for creating leather and skins and preserving hides and preserving food. And so it took on a great importance for survival in order to keep your food for longer periods of time and to uh, keep you supplied with food during times when food wasn't available and it kept you from starving. So it's very interesting here that a sailor, as used in the biblical sense, is someone who is following the salt. This is only used 4 times in the Bible, and so that gives it some very interesting significance. And I thought that was very fun to look at. So we go back to how they reacted. And Vayiz Aku is the Hebrew word meaning that they called out, cried out. Now, another word that I'm more familiar with is uh, to um, to cry out, to kara. And so obviously this is not that same word of crying out. This has a different meaning to it. And so when we look at the root spelling of the word, which is the Zion, Ayin, and Kuf, it's pronounced Za'ak. And it has a different depth, and it's to shriek from anguish or danger. And so that is, it gives a little bit of a meaning here as to what these sailors were going through and the feeling that they had. They weren't just calling out in the Kara type of Hebrew word of crying out or calling out. They were using this za'ak, which is a much deeper to shriek from, just dread and anguish. They definitely thought that they were going to perish and that they were going to lose their life, which of course sets up the next study for how Jonah could sleep through this. Why were they crying out in near death and Jonah was just asleep? We're going to look at that in the next story. A few things to look at here that this wonderful commentation brings out is as they cried out to each of their own gods, and the phrasing shows that the sailors did not have a common god, but each sailor had a different god. So they were all of different idolatrous nations. And they're saying here that in the realm of this story, because, they look at why was the story put here? What was the purpose of this story being written, preserved, handed down so that we could read it today? Was it just to learn about a big fish? And they say, no, no. The reason here is that this ship becomes a microcosm for the entire Gentile world and how Jewish people are supposed to look at Gentile people, and brings up something here that's in rabbinic literature. They have a concept that at the time, the world consisted of 70 nations. And this idea grows out of the list of the 70 male descendants of Noah from Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 29. And so, again, bringing about what's the reason for this story? It's to represent that the world, all the nations of the world, were represented on that boat for Jonah to interact with. And the ancient rabbis argued that the prayers of these sailors from the 70 nations did not produce any results. And of course, in the Jewish mindset and Christian also, that only prayers to the one God can be effective because only the one God is real. Brings in a reference of 1 Kings chapter 18, where Elijah confronts the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. Again, very interesting. And so, contrasting this with what we talked about in verse 2, where the sage of Ibn Ezra talked about the Ninevites being not polytheistic idol worshippers, but worshippers of the one true God, albeit not in the way, at least that Judaism has formulated, and that's why Jonah was sent to the Ninevites to preach to them about the one true God that they were worshiping. And in contrast to that, it's why Jonah didn't have any message for the sailors on the boat. Again, contrasting the two different understandings of these nations and the people of the Ninevites. So, very, very cool thought process. And I hope it was a blessing to you. Next week, we're going to come back and start looking a little deeper as to, what's Jonah doing on the boat. And again, so glad that you're finding this valuable, and pray God's blessing upon you as you study and as you listen to this wonderful, wonderful unpacking of God's Word. Take care and see you next time. Bye bye.